It's the 7th of February. It's been the wettest winter on record, and the sun is shining today. And I was thinking yesterday evening when I got home, it was late and it was pouring rain, and I was thinking, in the south of Italy they have a saying that if it rains on the day of your marriage, there'll be no tears in the marriage. But I'm not sure if it's really true or not, but that's what they say. I also think that when people are getting married, it's like any major event in life, it's always surrounded with lots of advice. And people who, out of the goodness of their heart, want to share the experience of their lives and their experience with you. And I presume your preparation has been the same, peppered with advice and care and concern and love. And we're surrounded by wisdom. We've had the wisdom that came there with the beautiful psalm based on the second reading, Paul's letter to the Corinthians, to that early Christian community at Corinth, writing just about 24 years after the resurrection, where he separates the facts from the fictions of love. And that in itself is a reflection of the gospel, where Jesus says, love one another as I have loved you. And if you want to understand what the as is in that, love one another as I have loved you, we need to look no further than Calvary itself. And they're, I suppose, part of our religious tradition, part of our faith, part of our heritage. But wisdom belongs everywhere. And I thought this afternoon I would share with you guys, with those of you who are contemplating marriage, and those of you who are well dug into marriage, 3 pieces of wisdom that, have crossed my path in my 25 years of priesthood and professional bachelorhood, if I can put it that way. The first piece of wisdom that I wanted to share with you today is the piece of wisdom that you've probably heard a lot of this before, but it's the piece of wisdom that says that life is what happens when you're making other plans. And so, for instance, probably no different to any other couple, Dara and Debbie, have been looking forward, not just to this day, but to the future for a long time. And part of the planning involves a house and where it might be. And before it ever really gets, concrete in terms of where it is, there's the dreams about it. And it's going to be beside the sea, and it'll be huge, and a swimming pool, and beautiful rose gardens. And it'll be populated by Dara and Debbie, who will love one another forever. And they'll have 2 adorable, intelligent, and engaging children. But life is what happens when you're making other plans. And the house is a bit on the small side, with neighbours that you're not that keen on. And the swimming pool turns out to be a pool in the driveway every time it rains. And the rose garden is a window box that needs attention. And the children are adorable, but they're rope-haired teenagers who have a vocabulary that ranges from to and who do you complain to? Who do you moan to? Who do you go on strike to? I suppose on the one hand there's the immature who kind of, put one hand in their head and the other hand up in the air, and they're complaining to anybody who will listen to them that life in general, but marriage in particular, sucks. And then you have the mature who says, well, what do you expect? Life is what happens when you're making other plans. After all, while you're making those plans, you're beginning to accept one another, and you accept one another as they are, with their ups and their downs, and you adjust constantly because you have to, otherwise you have no option, and it will end in failure. You adjust your dreams to the reality. And in the process of adjusting the dreams to the reality, you begin to accommodate one another. And in the process of accommodating one another, love really grows and deepens, strengthens and consolidates. There's a lovely story told of a philosopher from a few centuries ago. His name was Moses Mendelssohn. He came from the center of Europe. And Moses Mendelssohn was a very erudite, intelligent, witty, humorous, well-read and well-written man. But he had one fault. He was a hunchback. But hunchback that he was, he fell in love with the daughter of a banker in the neighbouring village, and her name was Gretchen. And they met at market days and fairs and churches every now and again. And after a while, Moses Mendelssohn decided to go and visit Gretchen's father, as was the tradition at the time, to ask whether or not he could walk out with her with a view to marriage. And so the day arrived, and Moses Mendelssohn arrived at Gretchen's house, and he went in and he met her father, whom he already knew because he was a famous banker. And he said, I have been, talking to Gretchen, and I would like to walk out with her with a view to some date in the future marrying your daughter. And Gretchen's father said, Moses Mendelssohn, you are an erudite man. And you're witty, and you're charming, and you're well known, and you write well, and you inspire people. And Moses Mendelssohn stopped him and he said, but I'm a hunchback. And Gretchen's father said, I'm afraid so. Any possible union between Gretchen and yourself is not possible. And Moses Mendelssohn closed his eyes and he said, would it be possible to just say goodbye to Gretchen before I leave? By all means, Gretchen's father said. And so he crossed the corridor into the parlour where Gretchen was doing some needlework, sitting beside the fire. And she had a bit of a premonition that things hadn't gone so well. And of course, when things don't go so well, they talked about everything except the elephant in the room. But eventually something came up about a tradition. And Gretchen says, Moses Mendelssohn, do you believe that marriages are made in heaven? And Moses Mendelssohn said, Gretchen, I certainly do. He said, in fact, in our village, we have a tradition that when a boy baby is born, the angels of heaven stand up, take up their trumpets, and they bugle away to announce the birth of the baby. And then they put down their trumpets, and together they announce the name of the girl that he will someday marry. And Moses Mendelssohn said, do you know what, Gretchen? When I was born, the angels of heaven blew their trumpets to announce my birth. And then they put down their trumpets, they announced the name of the girl that I was to marry. But they bowed their heads and they said, but alas and alack, she will be a hunchback. And I, Moses Mendelssohn, stood before the court of heaven, he said, and I said, this creator of the universe cannot be so. A girl must be fair and well-formed, because if she is a hunchback, she will be the butt of cruel jokes and nobody will marry her. Master of the universe, give me the hunchback and let her be fair, well-formed and beautiful. And do you know what, Gretchen? I was that boy and you are that girl. And Gretchen was deeply, deeply moved, and she went on to marry Moses Mendelssohn, and they had a long and happy marriage. Life is what happens when you're making other plans. The second piece of advice I would like to share with you today, again, maybe a piece of advice that you know well. And it's a piece of advice that says that even a stopped clock is right 2 times every day. And the translation for me of that is that even though every bride and every groom tell themselves that they are Mr. and Mrs. Perfect, reality soon moves in to teach them otherwise. 25 years ordained this year, and I've done a fair amount of weddings, and they're always happy and joyous occasions. And then sometimes you meet people 2, 3, 4 years after the marriage, and you chat about this, that, and the other, and you ask them how the marriage is going, and they're saying it's fine, and children and the relationship, and they're always talking, and you're waiting for the word which ultimately and finally and always comes, but. It's fine, but. And the but translates as, it's okay, but I have discovered some minor and sometimes some major flaw in my partner. But the first couple of years of the marriage are the dream phase. And they think to themselves, he or she has this or that fault, but give me enough time and I will change my partner. I will get rid of their flaw or their fault. And the translation of that is, give me enough time to work on them, and I will make my spouse perfect as I am perfect. And if you want the unsettling translation of that, you have to ask yourself the question, how would you like to be married to you? You know, because this, I will change my partner to be perfect like I am perfect, is basically an immature, self-centered sort of love. And it's a far cry from the couple who are married 25 and 30 and 40 and 50 years. And he looks at her in the marriage bed and she's sleeping. And he says to himself, well, there she is. She still can't cook right. She can't keep a house the way my mother used to. She has the strangest relatives this side of the zoo. And despite a fortune spent on hairdressing, there's grey showing. And I could be wrong, but they look like crow's feet around the eyes. But you know what? I love her. And likewise, she looks at him sleeping and she says, well, there he is. He also has relatives that are stranger than anything you would find in the zoological gardens. He has no sense of time because he's always late. He can't count because a pint is not 1 but 4. And proportionately, as he's getting thinner on top, he's getting thicker around the waist. But I love him. And you know, that's what marriage does when marriage is successful. You go all the way from, I will change my partner, to, I have accepted my spouse. And that in itself is a reflection of how God loves us. Because God loves us not how we should be, not how he wants us to be, but as we are. And you know, it takes a long time of living and accepting to come to the reality that even a stopped clock is right 2 times every day. I'm nearly finished, you'll be glad to know. The third piece of advice is my own, okay? And the third piece of advice is the one that says, it's actually not for them at all, it's for you guys. So listen carefully. The third piece of advice is that you are their friends, you are their family. And you are here today not just as a guest, but you're here, as I said at the beginning, to pray with them and to support them. And you have a duty beyond today, and that's where the third piece of advice comes in. Because family and friends are those who know the song in your heart and who sing it back to you when you have forgotten the words and how it goes. You know, the best and the most loving of couples sometimes forget the words of love and the commitment that comes so easily on a wedding day. They say the first 7 years are the years that are the most forgetful, the critical years of amnesia. And it's up to you, the friends of Dara and Debbie, by your humour, by your prayers, by your example, by your own marriages, by your own relationships, to sing into their ears the words of love and commitment when they have forgotten how it goes. Because if you do that for them, then they in turn will do it for others when others have forgotten the melody of love. I was very lucky as a student. I got a chance to spend 6 years studying in Rome. And the house that I lived in was on Via di Porta Latina, small little road, but a road that had several large villas on it that in the 80s, when I was there, were embassies. And in fact, during the Second World War, the house next door to us was occupied by the German embassy. But during the years I was there, I think it was the Japanese or the Chinese were there, I can't remember. But it's not important. The important thing was that between our house and their house, there was a little basilica and a little piazza. And then you went into their house, and as you went in the gates, there was a little gate lodge. And in the gate lodge lived a couple whose names I can't remember now, but that's not important. They were in their mid to late 80s. And they used to do the same thing every day. They'd get up at 9 or 10 o'clock, and they'd come out into the piazza, and they'd sit on a seat under the Lebanon cedar tree in front of the basilica. And then they'd wander around up Via di Porta Latina and over to Piazza Piero to the market, and they would buy their fruit and their vegetables and their bottle of wine. And they'd come back holding the vegetables and their shopping, hand in hand, again sit for a moment or two under the Lebanon cedar in front of the basilica, and go back through the gates of the villa and into their courtyard. And all of this behaviour, because they did it every day, used to really amuse the gardener of the villa, who was called Fabio. And I remember one day coming home from lunch, and I used to cycle in and out of the university, and I pulled into the piazza on my bike, and they were just leaving the seat under the Lebanon cedar. And he looked at me and he looked at them, and he said to me, "Sai la problema con quella coppia? Sono innamorato." He said, "Do you know the problem with that couple? They're in love." Well, I knew a thing about that couple from the older priests who lived in our house. I knew that they had lived long enough to go through the ravages of not one but 2 world wars. I knew they had lost sons in the Second World War, and they had lost children and buried them along the way. But I also knew that even in their 80s, they could electrify each other across a crowded room. I knew that they had suffered much, but they had loved deeply together, equally deeply. They were lovers. They were words written large and a song strongly sung. And I tell you that story about them because you are the friends of Dara and Debbie, and you have to keep singing into their ears the song of love, and you can never let them forget it. Because if you do, and they remember it when they have forgotten it because you have been there, then someday, a long, long, long time from now, older and less beautiful, but more in love than today, old and decrepit, Mr. and Mrs. Dara and Debbie Murphy will walk hand in hand, and some inspired gardener, and on behalf of humanity, will declare about them the words that really is all that's important in a marriage. Sai lo problema con quella coppia? Sono innamorato. Do you know the problem with that couple? They're in love. Amen. Would you consider getting married now?